Hello to all my dear followers. I'd like to welcome you to a new chapter of What if Naruto trains to become a Genjutsu master alongside Kurenai? At the top right of the screen, I've left a card with a playlist showing all the chapters of this fanfic in order. Please, I ask for your likes and comments so I can bring you more chapters. Without further ado, enjoy.
It was late that night when Naruto was interrupted from his guard duties. Naruto felt Coyoki move above deck. Raising his eyebrow, Naruto's eyes panned around the deck from his vantage point by the bow of the ship. He spotted Samui standing at the stairs, a respectful distance from Coyoki but close enough to instantly respond to any threat, even if they managed to get past Naruto's net of shadow clones. Naruto looked down at Coyoki and was a little surprised when he noticed that she was looking straight at him as she walked towards him. Naruto sighed lightly as he turned and looked out at the darkened sea, knowing that this conversation was probably sparked by his words earlier. Coyoki drew up next to him and leaned on the handrail of the ship, looking out at the sea with him. The crash of small waves lapping at the side of the ship was the only sound accompanying their presence for a few minutes, both not wanting to speak, each for their own reason. There was an invisible conversation being held. The woman standing next to Naruto was struggling with what she wanted to say. Her pride and present state of mind lent her towards never thanking or ever showing true emotion, but she was obviously intrigued by the man standing next to her. Naruto himself was thinking of other things, perfectly content in letting the woman remain silent and leave or speak on her own terms, especially since he didn't even wish to have a conversation with the woman. Eventually, the silence was broken by Coyoki. "Why did you continue this mission?" she asked, and Naruto looked at her with an incredulous expression. "My reasons for continuing this mission were already stated, Coyoki-san," he retorted slowly. Coyoki didn't even flush as she looked at him. Naruto knew that question was simply her wanting him to speak. "Then why do you care about what Sandayu said about me?" she retorted just as slowly. Naruto looked at her sharply. Seeing the intensity in her eyes was just like when she was acting. "You spoke as if you knew exactly what it was that Sandayu did, and you hated the very mention of it happening to someone else," she said. Naruto cursed inside his head. He had to go and open his mouth around one of the more perceptive women around. Naruto turned from Koyoki's gaze. "Caring about your predicament or not doesn't change the mission, Coyoki-san," he said. "Then why mention it at all?" she asked. "You could have stayed silent and still continued the mission, but you criticized Sandayu for his treatment of me. Why?" she asked persistently. Naruto frowned, thinking over what to say before he spoke. "Because I am moved around like a board piece as well, Coyoki-san, just like every ninja," he said, and he could see Coyoki accept that reasoning slightly. "And despite what I said, the fact remains that you should not be acting the way you do about your own country," he retorted to Koyoki's shocked face. "What do you mean?" she asked with a heated voice. The anger laced into her eyes now made her seem like a woman on fire, as opposed to her normal reactions, and Naruto had to wonder why it was he was capable of drawing such emotion from the women around him. First, Samui broke her shell slightly when she complained about Coyoki in a roundabout way, and now Coyoki herself. "While I disagree with Sandayu's actions, the fact of the matter is you have an obligation to your subjects as the princess of their country, Coyoki-san," Naruto said to Coyoki's scowling face. "Not everyone wants to be what they become, but sometimes people have to do things they don't want to in order to better themselves or the people around them," Naruto explained. "Just because I don't think you should be forced into taking the position doesn't mean I think you should live acting and allowing the people who loved your father and you so much they give their lives for you to wallow under a tyrant that cares nothing for them," he said heatedly. Coyoki scoffed, turning away from him, though her countenance was softened as she looked away. "I lie to everyone," she whispered. "I even lie to myself. I act like other people because I don't know anything about myself. I can only be an actress. There is nothing else for me," she said softly. "I'm not a princess and I certainly don't know how to run a country," she admitted. Naruto shrugged. "That doesn't matter," he said honestly, drawing a surprised look from Coyoki. "If you act so well, then act like a queen and you'll be a much better ruler than your uncle," he admitted. "But if you give up before you even try, then you're sure to fail and everything else you do will be overshadowed by that failure because you will never have even tried to live your own life," he said solemnly. This time he felt that phantom pain in his heart as he thought about his own trials at home. His introspective moment lasted but a moment, and Naruto knew no one had witnessed it. Not even Samui, who had been watching since their charge approached him. He was relieved at that. His years of training and introspection hadn't tightened his lips any, it seemed. Koyoki's eyes remained locked upon the handrail as she thought about his words, and that same sound of waves crashing against the ship covered their silence. This time, the silence was a companionable one, as Coyoki was deep in thought and Naruto stood guard beside her. He waved at Samui to get some rest while he watched Coyoki think hard. The night passed quickly because of Coyoki's presence, but Coyoki only moved once the sun peaked above the horizon of the frothing sea below them. She looked at Naruto for a moment before she turned and walked past him towards the stairs down into the bowels of the ship. 2 words drifted to his ears from her lips as she passed, so brief and light that he suspected they might be a figment of his imagination from the wind gusting across the sea. "Thank you," she had said. Naruto shook his head as he looked at her, wondering why it was that he had opened up to her as much as he had when he barely knew her, even with the 3 days they had spent together. Scene break. Later that day, the crew had disembarked from the ship and was making their way along a trail, carriages protecting most of the crew as they traveled. Naruto maintained his net of shadow clones as they continued on their travels. He had managed to rest for a few hours while the crew had disembarked, but Naruto wasn't feeling tired at all. He had gotten accustomed to having a few nights of little sleep, then one good rest during his training. It took the carriages most of the day to travel through the snow on the trail, but soon enough, they had reached a tunnel on the trail. The carriages rolled to a stop and Naruto, the original, and Samui both climbed off their carriage, which was carrying Coyoki, to talk to Sandeu and the director, whom had stopped their caravan. Naruto and Samui both didn't feel Coyoki was really going anywhere since she hadn't made much of a fuss since her talk with Naruto. Naruto and Samui approached Sandeu as he gestured towards the giant cave in front of them. "Beyond this is a village where our comrades are gathered for the return of Coyoki Heim," he said, and Naruto felt a flash of annoyance from within himself as he looked at the old man who had manipulated Coyoki into trying to take a throne she had no desire for. However, he was bound by contract to follow this man and crew, specifically Coyoki, as a guard, and he would not allow such personal feelings to sway his ability to carry out his assigned mission. "After we finish filming here, we plan on making a formal visit." He looked rather nostalgic as he looked upon the snowy white expanse surrounding them. "Everyone has been eagerly awaiting the princess' arrival, more than you can possibly know," he said reverently. Naruto had to hold back a scoff as the director yelled at the men whom had needed to use the restroom to load back onto the trucks. Naruto turned to Samui. "Would you ride up front for now?" he asked of her. "I'll be fine with Koyoki-san, and I would like one of us keeping an eye on the road ahead," he offered, knowing that Samui had been growing bored with being around Coyoki. Not that it had affected her performance. It was just a bit insufferable when Samui turned even colder than normal. "Very well," Samui replied as she climbed into the truck with Sandeu. Naruto turned and headed towards the truck as the caravan started to move. His white cloak swirled around him as the wind picked up, and he received the memories of a certain clone from his net. Naruto let out a very loud sigh as he realized that Coyoki had only been biding her time before trying to escape once more. With a single set of hand signs, he disappeared from the caravan, heading to the last place his clone had sensed Coyoki as she fled. It didn't take him long to locate her cold body. For a moment, Naruto felt a chill creep up his spine as he thought she had died, but he was reassured as he felt her chakra still pumping strong. She was only a civilian, but he was so close he could feel even her small amount easily. Lifting her up, Naruto began to make his way back to the cave where he had last seen the caravan. He had a clone waiting for him there, and a few more with the net surrounding the caravan to lead him to where he needed to go when he returned. Scene break. It wasn't until he was well into the cave, piggybacking Coyoki, when he felt her stir on his back. Naruto grunted as he felt her shift. "Why is it you're the one who always finds me?" she asked wearily. Naruto shrugged. "It's my mission to protect you, Coyoki-san," he replied. "Whether you're being forced into doing something you don't want to, or if you were willing, I'm being paid to protect you either way, so I will. Right now, the best way for me to keep you alive is to keep you with the crew and my partner," he said. Coyoki was silent for a moment before she retorted. "Wouldn't the best way to keep me safe be by taking me from here?" she asked. Naruto paused for a moment before shaking his head. Not really, he admitted. Your uncle now knows you're alive, and there is nowhere you can run and hide from him now. It's either a confrontation or you dying that will end this for you, he said. He felt Coyoki stiffen at his words, but he knew that she had needed to hear that. It was true, and Naruto knew this woman would be dead, if not for his and Samui's protection up until this point. While she made good money acting, she would not be able to pay for a continued A-rank defense mission from one of the hidden villages, who were probably the only people with ninja capable of combating Snow Country's unique armor. A tense silence fell between the two as Naruto continued to walk at a rather sedate pace, letting her contemplate whatever she needed to. It was a few minutes later when she whispered to him, "You should give up," she said, and Naruto stiffened slightly. His muscles tensed as he replayed that phrase from his youth. He didn't react further, however, as Coyoki spoke again. "It's useless. No matter what you do, there is no way you can beat my uncle. It seems death is the only option left to me," she said quietly. Naruto scowled. "I'm not someone who gives up until I'm buried in the ground," he replied harshly. "If you give up, everything else comes to an end." Coyoki gasped sharply as he turned a cold blue eye upon her. Naruto held her gaze for a moment before it was broken by the sound of a horn being sounded. Naruto blinked. He sensed a small bit of chakra running towards him from the sound of the horn, and was surprised when he looked down to see metal bars with wooden planks interspersed between them. He blinked again as Coyoki said, "Train, train." Naruto repeated as he hazily remembered what he had read about them. Then his eyes widened as the front of a train came into view behind them in the cave. "Shit!" Naruto said as he turned around and began sprinting down the cave, easily keeping ahead of the train even with Coyoki upon his back. Naruto smiled when he saw the opening of the cave coming into view, and he exited the cave, then dodged to the left of the mouth of the cave. He took 3 deep breaths before sighing as he looked at Coyoki, who was looking at the train with abject terror. "It's been a while, Coyoki." A man's voice came from the train. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he looked at the train, one of his clones dispelled, letting him know of Samui's position near the movie crew, which was hiding, while also telling him he was in charge of Coyoki right now. "So, it's been 10 years? The voice said with a slight bit of reminiscing. "Kazahana, Dotu," Coyoki said from next to Naruto, and Naruto's eyes widened as the man spoke again. "Come, let me see your face," he said just as logs impacted into the side of his train, rocking it. Naruto turned with Coyoki, keeping an eye on the 3 Yuki ninja accompanying Dotu, as he spied Sandeu and a whole contingent of samurai standing upon the hill above the train tracks. "Everyone, Coyoki Heim is watching. Victory will be ours," he yelled as the contingent roared to life. "Kazahana Dotu, do you know how long we have waited for this day?" he asked. "I am Asa Sabin, Sandeu of the 50th Brigade. We will avenge the death of Kazahana Susetsu-sama from a decade ago. We will take our fury out upon you," he declared as the brigade yelled in triumph and began their charge. Naruto turned to Coyoki, whom was watching the charging samurai with a shocked look upon her face. Naruto knew that they were going to be slaughtered unless something happened, because if Dotu wasn't sending the Yuki shinobi, then he had something else planned. "Now is the time for your decision, Coyoki Heim," Naruto said solemnly, drawing her attention back to him. "Will you fight with those men whom are risking their lives, or are you going to run away and live the rest of your life in fear because you gave up?" he asked. Coyoki looked at him and then at the samurai, just as the order was given from the train to lower some of the walls of the train. Coyoki looked back at Naruto. "Can you defeat Dotu?" she asked. "Can you bring spring to this country?" she asked. The significance of the words escaped him, but he knew what she was asking. "Do you believe I can do it?" Naruto answered back. "Do you believe you can lead better than your uncle?" he asked. Coyoki took a moment, her eyes landing upon the weapon holes in the side of the train. Then she spoke. "Beat Dotu, Naruto, and I will lead my country like I'm supposed to. I'll act the part," she admitted, and Naruto bowed to her with a smile. "Very well, my lady," he said as he looked at her smirking face. He disappeared in a swirl of snow as 10 of his clones appeared around her. Scene break. Naruto appeared in front of the charging samurai. His feelings about a slaughter were soon proven as he watched volleys of kunai shoot from the train towards himself and the charging brigade. He smiled as he bit his thumb, Kuchios no Jutsu, Gamekin, he said, and suddenly found himself stories above the last place he had been. He wasted no time in shouting his orders. Gamekin, shield in front, plunged into the ground immediately. He said, and his workings with the large, shield-wielding toad summon allowed Gamekin to react instantly to Naruto's words. Gamekin plunged his shield into the ground in front of him, widening its range of protection as it sunk into the snow easily from its weight. Where Dotu had expected the entire brigade to be brought down by his attack, he suddenly finds himself facing one of the legendary Gamma summons, his kunai attacks reflecting off Gamekin's hard shield as if they were no more than Senbon attacking the great gates of Konoha itself, and the entire brigade still alive behind the shield of the giant toad. Though I may be slow, my defense isn't bad, Gamekin recited in his deep voice. Great to see you, Gamekin. Thanks for your help, Naruto said to the toad he was standing on. A pleasure to see you as well, Naruto Dano, Gamekin said in response as his eyes rolled in their sockets to lock upon the train, which had stopped spewing kunai at his shield. What is my objective, Naruto Dano? Gamekin asked as he brandished his Susumita at the train. Naruto looked at the tracks and smirked. Please destroy the bridge so they cannot flee. While I deal with the ninja, please protect the civilians behind us. Naruto responded as Gamekin grunted, swinging his massive weapon in an arc and easily smashing into the bridge on the other side of the hill to block the train from simply moving forward and escaping. I'm clumsy, but I'll protect them, Naruto Dano, Gamekin said as he brought his Susumita into a defensive position. Naruto then leaped from Gamekin's head, jumping down the toad's body to reach the hill in front of his shield, and then began to run towards the train. He bit his thumb once again and went through similar hand seals before calling out, Kuchios no Jutsu, Gamekichi. Naruto smiled at the human-sized toad that appeared from the smoke in front of him. Yo, Kichi, Naruto said as he stopped near the train, with many of the operators of the train looking at him in confusion. Yo, Naruto, Gamekichi said in response, looking at his summoner with a gleam in his eye. Time for some real battle? He asked, and he grinned when Naruto nodded. Combination or single combat? He asked with glee in his voice as he eyed the train in front of him. Stop! Dotu's voice rang out as Naruto began to answer his summon. Naruto raised an eyebrow as he spotted the man near the beginning of the train, whom was holding some sort of microphone in his hand. Know that by attacking this train you are attacking the king of Yuki no Kuni's personal transport, he said pompously, and Naruto scoffed. State your reason for being within my country and the reason you have interfered in personal matters. If your reason is sufficient, I might be willing to overlook this if you dismiss your summon and step aside, Dotu said from his place on the train. Gamekichi's eyebrow twitched as he looked at Naruto's expression. He's not really the king, is he? He asked, and Naruto shook his head sharply. How do you want to answer him then? Gamekichi asked, and Naruto grinned, which prompted Gamekichi to grin, as well as Naruto went through a few hand seals, just as Gamekichi swelled up to twice his size. Suetun, Tepidama one. The both of them yelled as their mouths spewed a large balls of water that hurtled towards the train in front of them with incredible force. The train crew's eyes widened as the two balls of water converged upon each other, and instead of canceling each other out, combined into an even larger ball of water that then smacked into the side of the train with the force of a tidal wave. Yells of surprise and panic filled the air as the water pushed the train off its tracks and then caused the back 3 cars of the 8-car train to dangle over the edge of the cliff the train tracks were placed upon. Gamekichi smirked as he looked at the train that slowly began inching backwards over the cliff. Stupid, arrogant, pompous ass, he said angrily as he stared at the train. He was slightly surprised, however, when he noticed the train disconnect between the first 3 cars and the rest of the train, allowing the 4 cars that were dangling to easily pull the rest of the train over the edge, crashing upon the sharp rocks and snow drifts below them with a loud shattering sound as the cries of panic and shock were silenced in death. Naruto and Gamekichi looked at the remaining 3 cars with suspense as Dotu's voice floated to them again. Very well, you are now enemies of Yuki no Kuni and will be dealt with, he said angrily as Nadar, Fubuki, and Mizore appeared before Naruto and Gamekichi. Gamekichi grinned viciously as he looks at the shinobi in front of him. All right, time for the real battle, he said excitedly. Sorry, Kichi, Naruto said as he looked at his friend. Their armor will dissolve all your jutsu, and I don't want to take all 3 without Genjutsu. I need your brother, he said. Gamakichi blinked before he frowned. You owe me some sweets, he said grumpily as he dispelled in a puff of smoke. Naruto smiled lightly. You bet, he said to the empty air before biting his finger yet again. Sometimes excellent healing was a pain, and went through his seals once again. Kuchios no Jutsu. Gamatatsu. The toad that appeared was the same size as Gamakichi had been. He was predominantly yellow in color with orange markings around his eyes and mouth. He also had 2 markings curving inwards on his stomach, while he also wore the trademark blue coat of the Gama clan, though there were 2 swords strapped across his back, much like Gamahiro. Naruto, how many snacks do I get this time for training? He asked almost immediately, as the slightly chubby toad looked at Naruto. Naruto just stared at Gamatatsu as the toad continued looking at Naruto with an expectant look, completely ignoring his surroundings. For a few moments, this silence engulfed the battlefield before, "Ha! He let go of a competent summon for this idiot? You're not too smart, are you, Uzumaki?" he taunted. Naruto suddenly smirked as Gamatatsu turned to fix Mizore with a glare. "Did you just say I was worse than my bro?" he asked with an oddly calm tone of voice. Mizore's eyes widened as Gamatatsu suddenly appeared in front of him, his webbed hand chopping into the large man's side and causing him to go tumbling through the snow as Gamatatsu glared at him. "I'm not worse than my bro," Gamatatsu yelled as he charged at the man with menace in his eyes. Naruto looked at the slightly shocked faces of Deidara and Fubuki. "Shall we start?" Naruto said with a smile as he disappeared from his place. Naruto smirked as he landed a punch on Fubuki, sending her flying through the air from his attack as Deidara retaliated. "Hayatan. Roga Deidara no Jutsu. 2. He yelled and Naruto's eyes widened slightly when he saw the pack of snow wolves that leaped from the snow surrounding him. "Take this, Uzumaki!" Deidara yelled as the wolves leapt upon him from all directions. Naruto's eyes narrowed and he suddenly disappeared from his spot in the middle of the jutsu. The snow wolves seemed to hang in the air as Naruto appeared behind Deidara, floating in the air for a moment before touching down onto the snow with a feather-light touch. Just as Naruto landed, the snow wolves burst into snow. Deidara's jutsu dissolved into nothing as Naruto looked at the man's completely shocked face. "Did you think that I only had ninjutsu and genjutsu roga, Deidara?" Naruto asked with contempt in his voice. The fact that the man had named a technique after himself utterly destroyed any form of respect Naruto might have felt for the substandard ninja in front of him. A true shinobi utilizes every weapon in his arsenal, not just one branch, Naruto said as Deidara gazed fearfully upon him. Now Naruto began, only to twitch when Deidara suddenly started to run away from him wildly, his face one of utter terror. Naruto twitched and appeared in front of Deidara. His leg snapped forward, crashing into the man's chakra armor covering his stomach but causing the man to cough up blood from the force of the blow and sent the man tumbling through the snow. Naruto frowned as he looked upon the man whom seemed to have changed from an arrogant person to a sniveling little boy in the matter of a day or so. But he supposed that's what happened when you took away every advantage the man had and then showed his jutsu to be worthless. Naruto was about to attack the man again when he sensed Gamatatsu's chakra spike as he yelled, "Take this, you fat ass!" He then, apparently, slammed his own body against the man with a ferocity that launched the man down the snow and directly towards where Deidara was struggling to stand. Naruto barely registered their wide eyes as they collided and suddenly both were covered in electricity, screaming in pain for but a moment, before their chakra armors both burst and a small explosion occurred, covering the both of them in burns and wounds which guaranteed they were dead. Naruto blinked, a bit surprised at the abruptness with which the fight had ended, but he turned to find Gamatatsu still glaring at the burned Mizore with a murderous look in his eyes. Naruto shook his head. He hadn't expected the enemy to capitalize on the one trigger to Gamatatsu's rage, but he certainly wasn't going to complain. Naruto then turned to Fubuki, whom was floating in the air above them having just rejoined the fight when her comrades imploded upon one another. "You have 2 choices," Naruto said calmly, looking directly into her scared eyes. "Stay here and fight me, in which case I kill you," he said emotionlessly, causing her to flinch. "Or stay here and serve Coyoki when I kill Dotu." Fubuki considered it for a moment. Her eyes flickered to her former comrades before she landed, kneeled down, and placed her hands on the snow in a form of submission to him. Naruto nodded at her as he looked at Gamatsu. "I'll pay you whatever you want for your help. Just guard Fubuki. Coyoki will need protection once Samui-san and I leave," he said. Gamatsu grunted but settled down in behind Fubuki, giving Naruto a poignant stare before he returned to glaring at Mizore's burnt corpse. Naruto turned his gaze upon the sole remaining obstacle to his mission's completion. Naruto approached the head train compartment with a grim face, and the spike of chakra along with the yell of Dotu caused his halt. Hideout, Kakuryu Bofusetsu, 3, and a dragon, not unlike Kakashi's water dragon, shot forward from the hillside. The snow turned black from the chakra running through it. Naruto dodged to the right, evading the dragon's head easily as he continued towards his target. There wasn't going to be any words exchanged. Naruto was ending this before Dotu did anything else. Naruto's eyes glowed as he started to draw upon the power he needed to end this fight, looking at Dotu and feeling him through his sensor. Rather, not feeling him through his sensor told Naruto that the man was wearing chakra armor like his underlings, and he seemed rather confident in it as he grinned madly at Naruto, running through hand seals at a rapid pace. Hideout, Kakuryu Bofusetsu, he yelled out once again, and Naruto evaded to the left this time. His hand was now outstretched behind him, the chakra coalescing into a familiar sphere in his hand as he reached the stairs of the train compartment. Naruto saw Dota's eyes widen slightly as he leaped forward, his hand coming from behind him and thrusting straight at the chest of Dotu. "Akuma Rasengan, 4. He said calmly as he plunged the red orb of swirling chakra at the man. For a brief second, Naruto encountered a barrier like the one surrounding Nadar, but the barrier shattered under the intense and heavy yuki of the Kyuubi, shattering the centerpiece of the armor Dotu was wearing. Dotu's scream was a short second before his chest was grinded into nothingness. The battalion of warriors, the crew of the movie, and Coyoki herself all blanched at the sight of Dotu's head flying through the air, his lower body falling down onto the train, since his entire torso had been destroyed by the intense, toxic chakra of the Kyuubi-powered Rasengan. Naruto's eyes tracked the path of the horrified gaze of Dotu's frozen head until it landed in the snow behind the train. Slowly, he relaxed his body, standing up from his thrusting position, and straightening up while allowing the Rasengan still swirling in his hand to dissipate. Naruto slashed his hand, splattering more of Dotu's blood upon the iron of the train he was standing upon. Naruto flexed his senses once more, ensuring that the entire fight was over. He felt the gazes of his crowd focused upon his back. He sighed when he realized that most of these people probably weren't familiar with a ninja's line of work, which meant that he probably just scared the hell out of most of them. Shrugging mentally, Naruto disappeared off the back of the train in a swirl of wind, reappearing by the head of Dotu. Naruto quickly sealed the head in a scroll before he disappeared once again, reappearing near the still shocked Coyoki. Naruto turned to look behind him, seeing the battalion of warriors making their way towards them. The movie crew was appearing from the brush surrounding the hill, and Samui stood upon the top of the hill, overseeing the entire hillside to accomplish their mission, though Naruto knew she knew he had clones surrounding their position. Naruto's face was emotionless as he turned back to Coyoki, who seemed to have only just gotten over the fact that the entire fight had lasted a total of 3 minutes from the moment she agreed to when Naruto had literally disintegrated half of Dotu. Naruto kneeled on his right knee. Placing a hand across his chest, he intoned strongly, "Hail, Princess Coyoki." Coyoki turned to him, a blank face upon her face as silence reigned upon the snow-ridden land. For what seemed to be an eternity, only the sound of the wind gusting in Naruto's ears filled the air before Naruto heard snow crunching, and a loud shout came from behind him. "All hail Princess Coyoki," came from the battalion behind him, and Naruto smiled as he remembered the politics Jiraiya had forced him to learn. Taking it upon himself, Naruto raised his gaze and looked at Coyoki, whom was looking at him expectantly, as if she knew what else needed to be done. A silent question asked and answered, before Naruto rose and stepped next to Coyoki, facing the kneeling battalion of warriors. "Long live the princess," he said strongly, and was repeated by the battalion once more, tears streaming down many of the warriors' faces as they repeated the phrase twice more, ensuring that Coyoki now had a following within her own country. Scene break. 2 weeks later, Naruto and Samui stood in a room adjacent to Koyoki's own, awaiting the soon-to-be official ruler of Yuki no Kuni. Wiping out the remains of Doto's followers had taken up a week and a half for Naruto to track them down and ensure Coyoki had a strong base to start before their mission ended. Samui and Fubuki had remained with Coyoki once they took the castle since it was armed with loyal fighters. Naruto had been commissioned to clear Doto's faction. Surprisingly, the castle had been the easiest to take. Naruto's plan had been incredibly unorthodox, but Samui had backed him, and the battalion they had started out with was left with no choice but to follow the two ninja or try to take the castle by themselves. Needless to say, they followed the man who had single-handedly destroyed the man they had been hoping to kill themselves. Of course, they had been expecting harsh resistance, up until Naruto walked up to the main gates and unsealed Doto's frozen face. He had then told the opposing fighters to open the gate or he was going to do the same to each and every one of them. The fact that Fubuki was floating above his head and was obviously protecting him had quickly destroyed any morale, and the castle's main gates had been opened before any man had the guts to rally his fellow soldiers. It had been a sweep of the castle once that had happened, and minimal casualties were incurred as Coyoki's faction suddenly found themselves with a fortress from which to establish their base. The following week Naruto spent tracking down the higher-level officials and ensuring they would accept Coyoki's reign silently, and getting rid of those whom wouldn't. Finally, after 2 weeks from when they arrived in Yuki no Kuni, Coyoki was getting ready for her official meeting of her subjects. She had been crowned as the princess, officially, just yesterday. She would be crowned queen if she ever married. A rustling of cloth announced the entrance of Coyoki and Fubuki, her personal guard. Fubuki had taken to her new role quickly, especially after Coyoki had told her that if she did a good enough job, she would make sure Fubuki would never need for anything ever again. The fact Fubuki had helped to overthrow her father seemed to have left Coyoki's mind as she accepted Fubuki as her guard as soon as Naruto offered her after Coyoki had noticed the woman was still alive after the fight with her uncle. Naruto and Samui turned to watch as Coyoki walked towards them, clad in silk royal robes that flowed around her perfectly. Her walk and bearing were as noble as any royalty, and Naruto was suddenly struck with the fact that this woman had been raised to lead her people. And, even if she was just acting, she was really fit for the position when she put her mind to it. Coyoki smiled at Naruto. "Let's get to it then," she said, and Naruto felt a shiver run down his spine as her eyes gleamed before she stepped past him and towards the raised balcony that overlooked the courtyard, where her supporters awaited her. Samui and Fubuki flanked her. Naruto stayed in the shadows, his eyes darting around the area and inspecting everyone as his clones, hinged in disguises, mingled in the crowd below. He chuckled slightly when he saw how stiffly Samui stood, occasionally rubbing her shoulders, next to Coyoki. Samui didn't easily forget Coyoki's earlier attitude, and while it may not be the best thing for a ninja to do, Samui was obviously holding a small grudge against Coyoki, as she was anxious to leave Yuki no Kuni, as evidenced by the fact the woman had already packed her bags last night when Naruto had agreed to leave today after the official greeting. Naruto had raised an eyebrow but refrained from comment when Samui had sent him a venomous glare. Naruto felt a shiver go up his spine again, and he tuned his ears back into listening to Coyoki. As such, because of his amazing contribution to my return to our country, and as a thank you for all of the efforts he has made towards our country's future, I wish to, as my first official act as reigning monarch of our country, name Uzumaki Naruto, Snow Country's High Guardian, a position which affords him citizenry within our country and protection within our borders. As cheers erupted, Naruto was brought forward with a blank look on his face as Koyoki's eyes gleamed at him. She seemed to revel in the fact Naruto was unhappy with the way she brought attention to him. She waited until the cheers had died down before continuing. "I want all of Snow Country and all of the elemental countries to know that Yuki no Kuni stands by Uzumaki Naruto in any dispute, and we will fight with him should he ask," she said as she grabbed a medal which appeared from one of her servants and offered it to Naruto. Naruto stared into her eyes as cheers erupted once more. "You may just come to regret this decision, Koyoki-sama," Naruto said quietly as he bowed his head, allowing her to place the medal around his neck. "I may," she conceded just as quietly as she laid a kiss upon his forehead. "But I would much rather have you as a friend than an enemy," she commented before she turned and spoke to the crowd once again. "Thank you all for supporting me," she yelled, "and I will endeavor to prove myself worthy of your support, as well as try to be as good a ruler as my father, King Susetsu." she announced with a passion Naruto was hard-pressed to ignore. However, when she turned around, it was obviously an act as her eyes were completely cold. Naruto locked eyes with her and inclined his head. She inclined her head back before sweeping back into her castle, Fubuki on her heels. Naruto shook his head as he fingered the cold metal on his chest before turning to Samui, who was waiting for him. "Time for us to go," she said, and Naruto nodded as the two ninja disappeared, heading back to the dock to head closer to their home villages to get their next mission. Naruto laid on his bed in the hotel room that he and Samui shared, wearing a t-shirt and boxers. Of course, a kunai knife was tucked under his pillow. He may be comfortable, but he was hardly unarmed. The sound from the outside hot spring, attached to their room, told him that Samui was still soaking in the soothing waters of their bath and spa. He had quickly found out that Samui's large womanly assets gave her problems, and he noticed, just as fast, that Samui enjoyed soaking in the hot springs as it helped her back problems as well as allowed her to enjoy a brief respite from the weight of her own body. As such, he had made it a point to find hotels with hot springs available whenever possible, occasionally paying out of pocket for them during their time together on missions. This also led to Samui warming up to him much faster than he figured she normally did, especially considering she had agreed to share rooms with him shortly after she realized what he was doing. The past few months had been fast-paced. After their adventures in Yuki no Kuni, Naruto and Samui had been all across the elemental countries, fulfilling missions with nothing but praises from their clients. They still had yet to see either of their home villages, but neither ninja found that odd, especially since some ninja spent years not seeing their home because of mission requirements. There had been only one wrinkle in their missions, and Naruto's fist clenched as he thought about the event which had actually led to his current stage of familiarity with Samui. He was brought out of his thoughts as the sound of the traditional sliding door opening penetrated his angry thoughts. Samui stepped through the opening, a single towel wrapped around her womanly curves, water still dripping from her wet hair. Naruto raised an eyebrow, but Samui merely walked over to her own bed and lay down, allowing her towel to move low as her breasts were mashed into her mattress. Her towel covered just above her butt and the majority of her upper thighs as she turned her head towards him. Naruto locked eyes with her, and she held his gaze for a moment before closing her eyes. Naruto smiled to himself as he shook his head. The woman was most definitely more comfortable with him, but she still didn't do well with words. She showed what she wanted and what she needed through actions, not words. Naruto slipped off his bed, padded over to her own, and swung himself on top of her body, resting his thighs on the side of her wide hips, and shrugged his shoulders as Samui's, now open, right eye tracked him. He smirked at her as he grasped the bottle of oil she had placed on the nightstand before she left the room to soak, and squirted some of the oil onto his hands, placing the bottle back on the nightstand before he rubbed his hands together and placed them on her upper back, beginning the massage Samui had regularly began making him give her. He had offered to give her a back massage close to 2 months ago, and at first she had reluctantly agreed, but only while she was fully clothed and while she sat upright. After their first session, she had thanked him, but Naruto got the feeling she didn't really like it, especially with the way she tensed at his touch. However, it had been a week before she asked him this time to massage her back once again. Slowly, over the past month, and especially after their slight wrinkle, she had relaxed around him, relaxed her muscles, and then allowed him to massage her while she was lying down. It was only a week ago that she had done something similar to this, allowing her bare upper back to peek at him as she fixed him with a stare that told him he knew what to do. Naruto had been a bit hesitant to climb on top of her, but she had placed a hand upon his legs, spreading them around her hips before she settled back down and allowed him to caress her aching muscles. Naruto's hands slowly and carefully worked the tense muscles of her back out, and Samui sighed and occasionally moaned in pleasure from the amazing massage Naruto gave her. Naruto smiled when he saw how relaxed his partner was. Jiraiya had managed to work in massage lessons and the like on different things regarding women during his training, and Naruto had accepted the lessons simply to indulge his godfather. While he had never had a use for them during the training trip, he did enjoy the way Samui seemed so relaxed after his massage, especially when she drifted off when he was finishing, and he was treated to a soft expression on her normally cold face as she slept. He had been struck by how cute she seemed, but he didn't linger on her as he dragged his own blanket over her and left her to sleep while he meditated. His heart wasn't prepared to do anything with anyone until he had returned home and finished what had happened there. He had told himself as he drifted to sleep that night, but he hadn't known if he was telling himself that or trying to convince himself of that fact. Regardless, as he began his massage of her back, Naruto concentrated on making sure his technique was as flawless as possible, taking in the way her muscles reacted to his hands and pressure. A puff of smoke had a kunai knife in Naruto's hand as Samui shifted beneath him, her tanto sticking out from her hand as she eyed the smoke before a messenger toad was revealed. For a moment, both trained ninja were tense before they relaxed, their weapons disappearing from whence they came as Samui relaxed back into her mattress and Naruto raised his hand in greeting. "Yo," he said lightly as his left hand continued massaging Samui's back. The messenger frog frowned as he presented a scroll. "I wish I could say I come bearing better tidings, Naruto Dano," he said as he placed the scroll upon the bed. Both Naruto and Samui eyed the scroll before Samui turned an eye upon Naruto. Naruto nodded and Samui reached over, plucking the scroll from its resting place. She unraveled the scroll in front of her head and Naruto read it as he mindlessly let his hands roam Samui's tense back. "I just received information from Tsunade that the Akatsuki have made their first move." The first line of the scroll was something that brought surprise to Naruto. He knew that Akatsuki was after the demon containers, but he also thought they had at least another month before they began moving again. They had pushed their timetable up from the last report Jiraiya had received. "I'm too far away to help you on this one, Naruto. It's time to put your 5 months to use." Gaara, the Ichibi's container, who you defeated during the Chunin exams 3 years ago, was abducted by Deidara, a bomber from the Destruction Corps of IWA, and Akasuna no Sasori. These two are not to be underestimated, Naruto. Tsunade has dispatched 2 teams, one with Kakashi, Sai and Sakura and another with Guy, Niji, Tenten and Lee on them. Files attached for you. They are rendezvousing at the border between Suna and Kawa no Kuni. Your mission is to assist in the recovery of the Kazekage, Gaara, and attempt to capture one of the enemies, if possible. If not, Tsunade wants me to tell you to run, but I know you, so do what you need to. Good luck, Jiraiya. Naruto stared at the names of his enemies for a few moments before he felt Samui shift beneath him. Naruto looked down to see Samui looking at him expectantly. Naruto just shook his head. Quietly, Naruto swung himself off his partner and landed on the ground next to the bed. Samui rolled away from him, sitting up with her back to him as she began to dress. The oil had soaked into her skin, and that was the thing Naruto enjoyed about this particular oil Samui had found. It left very little residue but was perfect when he was still massaging her. Naruto smiled viciously as his eyes glinted. It was time for him to really cut loose. He was about to meet his first real match since Jiraiya had left almost 5 months ago. Naruto felt energized as he grabbed his own gear and proceeded to dress. 1 minute later, the room was deserted, both ninjas speeding their way to accomplish their next mission. Scene break. Leaves rustled. Limbs creaked. Air gusted. Kakashi's eye widened as he and his team spotted their opponent jump back, even as the massive chakra of someone Kakashi vaguely remembered seemed to appear in the midst of his team, accompanied by a smaller, but still potent, pool of chakra. Kakashi turned to keep both opponents in his eyesight, but his eye widened even further as he took in the familiar burnt orange sash hanging around the waist of a person Kakashi was very familiar with as the chakra signature. He felt suddenly clicked in his mind. His eye traveled over his former student and current friend. Naruto had come into his true body in his 3-year absence. The way he had landed silently in their midst, as well as straightened, speaking of the way his body had gained the grace of a person familiar and comfortable in their own body. He had made little change to his outfit, wearing almost everything the same except with 3 glaring differences. The first of which was that his untamable spiky blonde locks were held within a braid down his back, looking more sophisticated than the wild look his free hair had given. The second and third were changes he had made to his dark gray shirt, having the traditional red swirl added to the back of his shirt. The light red, almost orange swirl which represented his clan's land, dominated almost the entirety of his back. Finally, on his left breast, in kanji just large enough for one to read, stood a word that brought a question to Kakashi's lips: Dawojanki, or maelstrom. Kakashi smiled lightly behind his mask when Naruto turned to him, and the young man's eyes turned slightly less cold than before. Scene break. Naruto allowed a bit of the happiness he felt at the reunion of him and Kakashi to show in his eyes as he looked at him. He could feel Sakura behind him with a questioning gaze as well as the creepy pale white dude plus the older woman, but he kept his eyes focused towards Kakashi and his true opponent as Samui swept the area with her eyes behind him. "It's been a while, Kakashi," Naruto said as he kept his eyes away from the eyes of the clone he felt in front of them. Naruto had met this man before, and it was obvious that this was not the true person. Despite this, Naruto wouldn't take a chance with even a clone of such a dangerous person. He did find it a bit disconcerting he didn't take advantage of the fact that Naruto had landed in the middle of his opponents when he could. "Yo, Naruto," Kakashi replied lazily, waving his hand with a smile behind his mask. Naruto's lips twitched as he looked at the familiar scene, and a small sense of nostalgia came over him as he looked at Kakashi, but he crushed that when he brought his mind to the present. "Naruto?" Sakura asked from behind him. Naruto didn't bother to respond to her as he looked at the waist of the clone. "You've changed since the last time I saw you, Itachi-san," Naruto said as he made sure to keep his eyes away from the dangerous eyes of this Uchiha master. If Naruto were watching the face of Itachi, he would have seen a cool expression reflected back at him, but, as it was, Naruto only received silence as the tension his arrival had cut through suddenly returned. Naruto waited another moment, allowing his eyes to take in the stance of Itachi as he searched the surrounding area for the battle to come, however short that would be. Naruto felt Sakura shift behind him, and the movement prompted the reaction from his opponent as Itachi's legs tensed, and he was suddenly moving towards their group. Naruto flew past Kakashi and matched the S-ranked opponent's movements, wielding a kunai knife to deflect the 3 shurikens launched at them with a simple flick of the man's wrist and then blocked the kunai he had drawn to throw after the shuriken. Naruto made sure his eyes focused on Itachi's neck as he pressed against his opposing weapon. "You have become skilled, Naruto-kun," Itachi said monotonously. Naruto quirked an eyebrow as the two ninja jumped back from each other, attempting to stare each other down as Naruto kept his eyes away from Itachi's face. "However, your skills are not yet at the level they need to be. I'll have you come with us today, Naruto-kun," Itachi said, and his finger pointed at Naruto. Naruto appeared to twitch and a kunai knife appeared in the middle of Itachi's chest. Naruto grit his teeth. "Well played, Itachi-san, I concede," he muttered to himself as his chakra flexed and the Genjutsu around him, which had 3 clones of Itachi attacking him as the body he had slain disappeared into a flock of black crows, shattered. Naruto grit his teeth as he placed his eyesight upon Itachi's feet. His surroundings had shown that he was back where he had been after he had jumped back, and his team was still behind him. Itachi's foot twitched and Naruto took a step back as Itachi spoke. "You've improved more than I thought, Naruto-kun, to be able to sense and break my Genjutsu with just one glance. I wish to use my Manjikyu on you to see its effects. You would be a worthy test of my abilities," Itachi said, and Naruto's eyes widened as he smirked. "Naruto," Kakashi barked. "Itachi is really dangerous. Don't just attack him by yourself," he warned. Naruto shook his head as he raised his eyes, looking directly into the deadly Sharingan. "He is dangerous, Kakashi," Naruto conceded as he clenched his fist. "But his true power is locked with his real body. This clone is a mere mockery of his power," Naruto said before he disappeared into a puff of smoke and Itachi's eyes widened. Naruto appeared before Itachi. His hand glowed from the bright blue ball of chakra swirling in it. "Next time, don't try to stop me with 30%, Itachi-san. I want to test your abilities myself," Naruto growled out lowly as Itachi's eyes closed, the Rasengan plowing into his face and shredding it. Naruto landed on the floor from his thrusting pose, letting out a short breath as he let the Rasengan in his hand dissipate and the body fall onto the ground, revealing the uniform of a regular sand jounin. Naruto blinked before he spat on the ground, disgusted with the fact that Akatsuki had used the body of another to attempt to stall them. Naruto turned around at the sound of his partner approaching him. His eyes locked with hers and Samui nodded at him as he looked past her to the team from Konoha, taking in the change to Sakura's physique, how she had shot up but her body still looked much like a prepubescent woman. She had on a red shirt with the same design from her dress from her genin days, but she had switched her skirt with a shorter version but with biker shorts underneath. The thing that was oddest was the gloves she wore around her hands. They looked a lot like Kakashi's but also reminded him of someone else. Kakashi looked much the same. A few wrinkles showed the 3-year difference, and the older woman seemed much like most of the elders Naruto had met, wearing usual sand attire. The pale white boy, whose name was Sai, Naruto remembered, wore a black shirt which covered his chest and shorts that went a little past his knees, a tanto on his back and what seemed to be writing utensils on his hip. Naruto could see the questions in Sakura's gaze as well as the questioning glint in Kakashi's, but the eerie way that Sai boy was looking at him had Naruto shivering slightly. The elder from the sand was eyeing him with a wary eye, but Naruto had suspected that from the famed Chio of Tsunade. "We need to hurry. They've probably already started to extract the Shikaku from Gaara, and this was only meant to slow us down from getting to the site in time to save him," Naruto said, trying to forestall any questions that were forthcoming. Kakashi nodded, sending a look at Sakura to keep her from voicing the questions shining in her eyes. "He's right. We still have a long way to go," Kakashi said, and then turned to the little pug which had been hiding at the edge of the clearing. "Pakin, lead the way." Pakin barked once before leaping into the trees, followed quickly by Naruto and Samui, then by Kakashi, Sakura, Sai, and finally Chio. Scene break. As the team traveled further towards their destination, Naruto felt Sakura increase her speed, trying to draw near him, and he considered, for a moment, increasing his own speed to avoid her since he really wasn't in the mood to deal with the many questions his departure would have incited. Despite this, he simply sent a look at Samui, letting her know he was going to answer a few questions as he let her take the lead, following directly behind Pakin like Naruto had until just recently. "Naruto!" Sakura shouted from behind him, and Naruto looked over his shoulder at his former teammate, noticing that every other person was intently watching this interaction. Naruto nodded his head at Sakura in greeting. He saw her temper hadn't been tempered at all through the 3 years he had been away as her hands clenched from his dismissive way of greeting her. "Is that any way to greet your teammate after disappearing for 3 years?" Sakura asked with tension in her voice. Naruto raised an eyebrow. "I haven't been your teammate in almost 3.5 years, Sakura-san, and you're the first Konoha shinobi I have met since I left almost 3 years ago, except for my master. I have little to tell or share with you except the current mission," he responded. Sakura faltered for a moment, realizing what he had said was true, but her anger won out over her again. "Aren't you worried about your friends?" she asked. Naruto nodded his head. "Yes, but my missions are more important, Sakura. I will be sad or happy when I'm finally back home," he admitted. Sakura fell silent and lost a bit of speed, dropping back just as Kakashi decided to speed up and draw next to him, replacing Sakura. Naruto was a bit surprised at how easily he had offset Sakura, but turned his attention to Kakashi. "How've you been, Kakashi?" Naruto asked, remembering the olive branch that his former team leader had presented before Naruto had left. A shrug of the shoulders was Kakashi's laid-back answer. Silence between the two reigned for a few moments before Kakashi spoke. "You've grown, Naruto." He said it so simply as if it was obvious, and Naruto supposed it was. Naruto was confident of himself now, even against opponents on the level of Itachi, and he was comfortable in his own body for the first time in his life. The 2.5 years of training under Jiraiya had done him well. Of course, compounded with the fact that he and Samui had been accomplishing missions during the past 5 months with an ease that astounded even Naruto himself, had an effect, despite their one problem. Naruto had reason to be confident. Naruto nodded back at Kakashi in acknowledgement of his statement. "I was wondering," Kakashi started. "Did you ever find out that answer?" he asked. The way he spoke was a clear indicator of what he was talking about, and the way Naruto's eyes froze over quickly spoke of the answer. Kakashi lowered his head. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry," he said sadly, and Naruto knew the man didn't know exactly how much that information had hurt him, but he did know that it hurt Naruto, and Naruto was slightly surprised when he felt a bit of gratitude at the man's apology, despite him not being at fault for anything relating to it. Naruto nodded at Kakashi. His thanks was so soft that it was whipped away in the air from their passing, but Naruto was sure Kakashi knew of his gratitude, as the man's single visible eye crinkled into his signature eye smile. "Son of the White Fang, who is this person?" cried out Chio from the back of their group. Her squinted eyes were obviously locked upon Naruto. Kakashi looked over his shoulder, but before he could speak, Naruto did so. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto, Choba-sama," Naruto said, and Chio's eyes opened slightly. "And may I say that it is an honor to be in such an esteemed puppet master's presence, especially since the only person who could counter your poisons was our current Hokage," Naruto said, His voice was coated with honey, and it obviously surprised Kakashi and Sakura, though Naruto could almost feel the smirk on Samui's face in front of him as Chiyo's eyes locked upon him. A silence fell across the group as Naruto smiled at her, and Chiyo stared at him. "You're a dangerous man, Uzumaki Naruto," Chiyo finally said, and Naruto gave a foxy grin, knowing the elder would most likely pick up on his attempt to butter her up for any future dealings. "Much like your master, I would suppose Jiraiya-san has fared well," she said, and Naruto smiled. "He sends his regards and regretfully informs you that he couldn't reach here in time to be of use." Naruto replied respectfully. Chiyo's eyes gleamed. "Always the same with that man. Never can find the right place to please," she replied, and Naruto felt Sakura's jaw drop as Naruto almost faltered in his jump at the hidden jaunt at his master. Naruto chuckled as he shook his head. "I'll be sure to tell him of your opinion," Naruto returned, and Chiyo cackled behind him. "Be sure you do," Chiyo said, and Naruto turned his attention back to the front, resuming his normal pace as the group leaped their way to Gaara's hopeful rescue. Scene break. It took Naruto and his company a full day to near the rendezvous point where Pakken was leading them. Despite the fact Naruto could have been there much faster, his companions were slower than him, and it frustrated Naruto more than he cared to admit that he couldn't rush forward and save Gaara but remained with his group. He vaguely heard Kakashi as he informed Sai, Sakura, and Chiyo about the Kyuubi within him during their trip. He felt the demon fox stir at the mention of its name, but Kyuubi didn't say anything and Naruto dismissed it. He did weather a short glance from Samui as the suspicions she had were confirmed about his status. He had never outright said that he was a container, but the things he had done on their missions and the time spent together certainly clued her in. He did spend a good amount of time meditating to gain better control of the wild, chaotic chakra of the Kyuubi. Naruto's impatience must have been showing more than he wished because Samui increased her speed, drawing next to him as he led the way right behind Pakken, and sent him a rather poignant stare. Naruto's lips twitched at her face, but he nodded his head, reining in his feelings as he felt his cold mask slip back into place. The fight with Itachi had been anticlimactic since the man had been a mere shadow of the original. Naruto had ended the fight swiftly, not willing to allow his opponent to get a better opinion of his skills while he, himself, was in no danger. Naruto's sensor alerted him to the other Konoha team's position as they jumped into range, and Naruto's impatience resurfaced almost immediately. Naruto considered it for a moment before he disappeared in another burst of speed. Hearing the cries of surprise behind him did nothing to deter him as he passed Pakken easily. Gaara may not be a fellow Konoha ninja, but he was a Jinchuriki, and Naruto wouldn't allow the Akatsuki to debase his fellow demon containers if he could stop it. They may not be comrades, but they were his brothers and sisters in pain. He would protect them with the same devotion that he gave to Konoha. They deserved no less. Naruto saw the gorge appear before him and, with a slight leap, he disappeared into the crevice and spotted the large boulder, temple gateway, and Guy's team waiting on the water easily as he plummeted to the river which had cut the gorge out of the land. Naruto landed on the water with a rather large splash of water, considering the amount of chakra he had to use to soften his fall from the top of the gorge. He was greeted with the tense stances of each of the Konoha team, something which brought a bit of confusion as Neji could definitely see him with his eyes, but the lack of the bulging veins told him why they hadn't known who he was. It took a few moments before the recognition came from Neji and Tenten. Lee and Guy only seemed to relax once they saw Neji do so. "Naruto, this is quite a surprise," Neji said, and Naruto noted the man had changed little in his time, except the notable lack of overconfidence which had pervaded his being during the Chunin finals. He wore a loose white shirt with matching pants and a dark navy apron around his waist. Naruto nodded at the jounin though. "Gaara is behind this boulder?" he asked. Neji nodded quickly. "Yes, but there is a barrier that is placing a haze in front of my sight, so I can't get a real clear look inside," Neji informed him. "Yash, Naruto-kun," Lee exclaimed as he greeted Naruto, a bit belatedly. Naruto's lips twitched at the eccentric teen's way of emulating his teacher. He wore the usual green jumpsuit with orange legwarmers that mirrored his master's way of dress. "Yash, Naruto-kun, where's my youthful rivals team?" Guy asked loudly, his eyes darting around the area quickly. Tenten seemed on edge, but she was also quiet as she kept an eye on the water below them. She was wearing a long-sleeved white blouse with a high collar and red fastener and edges paired with similarly colored, puffy pants that looked like a hakama, with the exposed parts of her legs near the waist covered in bandages. She had on brown fingerless gloves and a large summoning scroll attached to her back, much like Jiraiya. Naruto noted the experience and familiarity between the entire team and knew this team was a veritable brute force team that was the pinnacle of teamwork and effort. He would be hesitant to ever fight them. Regardless, Naruto brought his attention back to the seal. He noticed on the boulder at Niji's words, "Kakashi, his team, and my partner are behind me." I was a little impatient. He admitted as he stepped closer to the boulder. "Niji, can you see any similar seals near this area? Like the one on the boulder?" Niji closed his eyes and Naruto followed, sensing the spike of chakra that Niji used to activate his Byakugan. And then he spread his own sensor out, stretching it to see if he could feel anything beyond the barrier. Naruto let out a low, frustrated moan when he realized that he couldn't. "I've found them," Niji said. "There is one on a rock 500 meters northeast, on a tree on the riverbank about 350 meters southeast, on a wall of rock 650 meters northwest, and inside a grove about 800 meters southwest." Niji informed his team and Naruto. Naruto's closed eyes snapped open as 4 bursts of smoke were blown away by the sound of 4 sets of feet rushing away in a flurry of action. Guy's team blinked and Niji's eyes widened as he beheld exactly how fast Naruto could be when he was pressed. "Thank you, Niji. I couldn't have found them without you. My clones will reach the seals shortly. You should prepare yourselves for who we will meet inside," Naruto said calmly. For a few moments, the team watched Naruto warily, obviously wondering exactly how much had changed with the young man during his absence from Konoha. It was just as Guy and Lee recovered that Kakashi's team, Pakin, and Samui landed in the gorge as well, appearing from the thick forest covering the top of the riverbed. Samui fixed Naruto with a stare he knew well, but he just shrugged, knowing that she would only be appeased once they were once again alone, and he worked his magic on her back. His massages certainly went a long way in appeasing her anytime he did something that annoyed her, and Naruto was sure to keep her as happy as possible, because an angry Samui was almost impossible to work with. Despite this, Naruto also knew that Samui was sympathetic to the way he felt because the stare she was sending him wasn't a glare as much as an admonishment that he shouldn't be rushing into this. Despite his power, he was not invincible and most certainly not the strongest shinobi in the world. He didn't have the courtesy to simply ignore the caution he had so prudently displayed before his training trip. "Naruto," Sakura's voice carried to him from the angry pink-headed Kunoichi. Naruto looked at her only to see Kakashi holding her back with a single hand. He whispered something to her and Naruto was surprised when Sakura's anger disappeared to be replaced with a resignation and a scathing look sent his way. "You shouldn't have run ahead like that, Naruto," Kakashi admonished. Though his tone was disappointed, Kakashi's single eye seemed to be sizing Naruto up once again, almost as if the legendary Sharingan Kakashi couldn't figure out exactly what was going on with Naruto. "I'm sure Jiraiya-sama impressed upon you the fact that you don't leave your team behind," Kakashi finished with a curious gaze. Naruto bowed his head. "I had no team to stay near until recently, Kakashi. Forgive me," he said. Though his apology didn't seem real, Kakashi nodded as he sent a speculating look towards Samui, wondering if the Kumo Kunoichi could actually keep up with the speed Naruto had displayed. It was at this point that Team Guy decided to display their usual greetings. "Wow, sh, my eternal rival appears," Guy yelled out with a smile. Kakashi seemed to grimace underneath his mask as he turned from Naruto. "Yo," he said with a small wave at Guy. "Who's the elder, Kakashi?" Guy asked. His smile was still there, but suddenly, the man's entire demeanor changed. His smile seemed forced, and his eyes seemed to lose their glimmer as he looked over the two teams. Naruto recognized the change from his own master, and his high respect for Guy went a notch further. The taijutsu master had a fearsome reputation. Konoha's green beast was not something Guy had made up himself. There was a reason he considered Kakashi, one of the most powerful ninja in Konoha, his rival. "This is Elder Chiyo of Tsunade. She's their representative," Kakashi answered. "My clones have found the rest of the seals. How do you suggest we enter?" Naruto said suddenly, having gotten the memories of the clones his own clones had made to inform him about their positions. Kakashi blinked and then looked at the other slip of paper on the boulder. "Should we buttonhook and leave 2 outside as guards?" Kakashi suggested to Guy quickly, eliciting a nod from Guy. Niji and Sai should be perfect lookouts as Tenten, Samui, Sakura, and Lee take the left while you, Naruto, Chio, and I should take the right. Kakashi explained to nods from the rest of the team. Naruto? He asked, and Naruto nodded as he leaped from his position, running up the boulder and to the slip of paper. A short burst of smoke later and Naruto was ripping the paper from the boulder with a quick burst of chakra. A single glance at Sakura from Kakashi was enough for the woman to rush forward, her hand cocked back for a punch. Naruto tracked her and his eyes widened as he recognized the form she was showing just as her fist impacted with the massive boulder, crushing it like paste in an obvious show of what she had learned since he had been gone. Naruto landed on water as Sakura jumped back and they waited for the rubble to clear before signaling their entrance, leaving their 2 lookouts posted outside. Scene break. The taijutsu users entered first, Guy and Lee taking the front positions and disappearing into the gloom of the cave. Then came Sakura and Chio, the powerful medic ninja combined with the ranged puppet user, followed by Tenten, the ranged weapons user, and Kakashi, the premier ninjutsu user in Konoha. Finished with the 2 genjutsu masters on the team, Naruto and Samui sent a silent nod to each other as they leaped into the gloom, preparing themselves for some of the hardest opponents they had faced. It took a few moments before Naruto's eyes refocused from the glare of the sun outside to the gloom of the rather massive cave they found themselves in. Naruto's eyes locked onto one part of the cave and he felt the anger and sadness well up in him as he beheld his fellow Jinchuriki upon the ground, his body motionless. Gaara had changed since he'd last saw him during the Chunin exams, shooting up and gaining almost as much height as Naruto himself. It was obvious he towered above his siblings were he to stand next to them. His original outfit had changed. He wore a red coat that covered his entire body, split between the legs to allow movement, but only a gray chest plate covered his midriff, reaching above his left shoulder. Naruto immediately noticed that the young man's gourd was absent, but the anger that he felt came from the man sitting upon his fellow Jinchuriki's body, as if it were a bench. The man had straight blonde hair, a large bang which hid the left side of his face, a scratched-out Iwagakure Hittite, and was wearing the Akatsuki cloak, black with red clouds upon it. He had black nail polish on his single remaining hand and slanted blue eyes. Deidara, the mad bomber of Iwagakure. Next to the man stood a tall clay bird, obviously part of the man's explosive clay. Next to him sat a hunched man. Most of his body was covered by his Akatsuki cloak, but his face had a face mask that hung below his nose. His hair stood straight up, as if it were claws that stuck up from the man's head. Naruto recognized him as well. Akasuna no Sasori. Well then, which of you is the Jinchuriki, I wonder? Deidara said tauntingly. Naruto tensed slightly. Oh, Sasori said, his eyes tracking over to Naruto. It seems Itachi has a nice handle on his target. The clicking sound that accompanied his statement sent a shiver through the entire opposing shinobi line. Naruto's eyes remained locked on Gaara's still body. He seemed to be boring holes into Deidara as he sat upon the unmoving form of Gaara. Sasori's eyes tracked his gaze and he eyed the bruised body of the Jinchuriki his partner was sitting on before he spoke again. I'll look after this one, he said. It seems the Jinchuriki wants this one back. He said to grim looks from the surrounding shinobi, none of whom seemed eager to initiate the conflict that seemed imminent. Master, Deidara said to most of the Konoha shinobi's surprise, I know this'll probably make you angry, but I'll handle that Jinchuriki. He said seriously. Sasori's eyes snapped to his partner. The assignment is one beast to one member. Don't push it, Deidara. His clicking still sent shivers down the Konoha shinobi spines as they wondered what was hidden underneath that cloak. Deidara sent a very heated look at Sasori, his blue eyes glowing in amusement as he retorted, leaving the rest of the present shinobi to wonder just how monstrous these shinobi must be to completely ignore 8 shinobi staring them down. If an artist doesn't get high levels of inspiration, his sentiments are dulled, master. Deidara returned happily. The Kyubi Jinchuriki is said to be considerably strong. He explained. Sasori seemed to scoff. What? You call those explosions fine art? Fine art is something wonderful that's left to last long into the future eternal beauty. Sasori retorted. All of a sudden their argument had changed directions as Deidara retorted. They take the same skilled effort. I respect you, but fine art is the beauty of a single fleeting moment of explosion. 10-10. Guy said, and 10-10 nodded as she whipped out 5 shuriken, whistling through the air at a speed that was nearly invisible, but a rustling of the Akatsuki cloak, and suddenly the 5 shuriken struck a metal tail sticking out from Sasori's back as he continued arguing with Deidara. Deidara, you little shit, are you trying to piss me off? He asked as if the 5 shuriken he had just deflected weren't even worth his attention. Well, then I was probably right when I said that it would anger you then? Deidara retorted. My fine art is explosions. Completely different from your little puppet show. He taunted to his partner as he rose, letting his bird grab the limp body of Gaara in its mouth as he faced his partner. A shift and the metal tail suddenly shot straight at Deidara, but the man jumped back, landing on his bird just as the thing took flight, starting to circle higher before heading towards the entrance. Naruto's eyes followed him. His eyes narrowed to slits as he tried to figure out how to bring the man back before he left. Lee! He yelled and smiled when he knew the young man knew what he wanted him to do. Wow-sh! Came the cry of the green beast of Konoha's protege, and a whirlwind of dust was the only way to track the fast Chunin as he sprinted from his place in line, up the wall of the cave to above the exit of the cave, and launched himself at the crazy bomber of Akatsuki. So sudden was the actions that even the dangerous people that both Akasuna no Sasori and Deidara were taken by surprise when the flying Deidara was suddenly kicked, and with a cry of Konoha Senpu, he was sent flying from his bird and to the floor of the cave. Naruto stomped on the ground and disappeared in a flurry of speed that was just as impressive, but Sasori was ready for this as Naruto's trajectory was calculated and Senbon needles thrown straight at his path. Naruto frowned as he increased his speed just slightly, outrunning the flying needles dripping with purple liquid. However, Naruto was knowledgeable of his teammates as his orange sash came undone behind him as he flew through the air, leaving a floating sash that stretched almost the entire length from where he left to his opponent in the ground. Eyes widened as the Senbon that would have speared into the unprepared shinobi behind Naruto's path were blocked by that same sash, creating a tinkling noise as the Senbon impacted against a cloth that they should have tore through. Naruto! Kakashi's voice cut through his trajectory just as he registered the fact that Sasori had adjusted to his new speed, but 8 tails of chakra suddenly appeared around Naruto, blocking every single Senbon Sasori launched with ease. Deidara's widened right eye was Naruto's only satisfaction as his hand crushed the man's throat in a tight grasp as he dashed past the man's crash site and thrust Deidara into the wall of the cave on the opposite side of the cavern from where Naruto had been standing only moments after the flurry of action. Naruto nearly snarled at the man who dared to defile Gaara's body by sitting on him as he beheld the man's excited gaze. You really are strong, he exclaimed excitedly as he eyed the 8 tails of chakra plus Naruto's glare. I wonder what your art is like, he said curiously, trying to cock his head to the side despite Naruto's hand around his neck. Naruto grit his teeth as he clenched his hand harder against the man's windpipe. You're forgetting something, aren't you? He asked with a flick of his eye upwards, his breath finally seeming to come a bit harder for the very unique shinobi. Naruto merely smirked wider as the man's blue eyes widened as he looked where his clay bird was. Naruto knew he could count on Lee as the remains of the clay bird finally landed on the ground. Splattering sounds filled the cavern as Lee landed with a bright smile on his face, Gaara's body underneath his right arm. Naruto could count on Lee's own code of honor, so similar to Naruto's own, to do what Naruto needed him to. Gaara-kuin's body has been recovered, Naruto-kun, he said, though the man was smiling. The sadness he felt from the death of another was evident in his voice. Thank you, Lee, Naruto said quietly. Deidara let out a strained laugh from his position, drawing the attention of Naruto once again. Already 2 of our members have captured others like you, he revealed with a gleam in his eye. And no one, not family or friends, tried to rescue them. But here you are, trying to rescue this one. His voice carried his disbelief. I heard that Jinchuriki weren't liked because of their bad moods, but you're different, just like that Gaara, he said while he strained to breath through Naruto's grip. Naruto's grip tightened just slightly and Deidara let out a cough, but it didn't stop the man's arrogant talk. Instead of caring, most of the village seemed to be on our side, he taunted. Both so pitiful and detested, you couldn't ignore each other? HN? He asked, and Naruto slammed the man into the wall once again. I swear to you. Naruto's quiet voice carried through the cave as he spoke to the Akatsuki member. "I'll kill every single one of you, and you won't get another bijou ever again," he hissed out. Deidara only laughed through Naruto's tight grip. "Gaara died because his Ichibi was extracted. You're soon going to share the same fate." He said, and Naruto's eyes flashed, but the Akatsuki member showed exactly how he got his rank as he broke Naruto's hold with a single sweep of his arm. Naruto growled as the man sent a powerful kick his way, which Naruto managed to sidestep, barely, but allowed the dangerous man to dash past him, reaching Lee quickly. The other Konoha shinobi tensed, but Sasuke's needles shot out again, causing them to have to move to dodge the man's attack and not respond to his partner's actions. Lee moved to block the man's attack but was surprised when Deidara's hand opened to show an explosive clay bird in his hand. Lee's eyes widened as he brought his hand up, but Deidara took advantage of the Chunin's reaction to land a particularly vicious kick to his leg, causing Lee to crumble to the ground quickly. Naruto was right behind Deidara but was unable to catch the man as the bird took flight and headed directly at him. Naruto cursed as he leaped high just as the small bird caused an explosion similar to an explosive note. Deidara smirked as he grasped the still body of Gaara and leaped towards the exit. Naruto grit his teeth as he landed and continued his pursuit of his opponent, his 8 tails flailing about him, protecting him from the Sanbon Sasori was sending his way. Naruto paused near the exit, his partner appearing next to him and his tails extending their protection to her as she stood next to him. "I leave him to you, Samui," he said. His voice didn't contain the normally gravelly sound that accompanied his usage of Kyuubi's chakra, and the Konoha shinobi stared as the fact that his tails of chakra were not an evil red color, but a shining blue that resembled a Rasengan more than the transparent look of a bijou's cloak. What was even more astounding was the fact that he wasn't covered in a cloak. These tails just sprouted from his body without any other chakra present. While the younger shinobi didn't recognize the difference, seeing as they hadn't seen a Jinchuriki in action before, the older generation stared at the chakra tails as if they couldn't believe the fact that this form was taken by anything other than a bijou's chakra. Then he was gone, disappearing back into the sunlight of the day as he pursued the man who had taken Gaara's body. "Naruto!" Kakashi yelled, obviously worried about the young man whom had just disappeared before he could stop him. Kakashi moved to join him, but Samui shook her head. "Naruto is more than capable of taking care of Deidara. Kakashi-san, we should focus on Akasuna no Sasori. He is a much more dangerous opponent," she said to Kakashi's fierce stare. "Naruto is being reckless. There's no way he's ready to face someone of Deidara's abilities alone," he retorted, but was forced to move as Sasori launched yet another volley of senbon at the gathered shinobi. "Naruto is not being reckless. He is capable of defeating Deidara. I have a much better grasp of his strength than you, Kakashi-san. I have been partnered with him for 5 months. Samui retorted coldly. "If you're so worried, we should make this fight quick to join with Naruto," she said. Kakashi frowned and eyed the exit before he closed his single eye. "Fine then, let's end this quickly," he said. "Cover me for 2 minutes." Chio scoffed as she appeared next to him. "Don't let any of his attacks even graze you. Just a scratch could prove fatal." She informed the group a bit belatedly as they all prepared themselves to fight the dangerous opponent suddenly before them. Scene break. Naruto left the gloom, his chakra tails dissipating, as he blinked in the sunlight of the day only to see Niji's Juken strike being blocked by Gaara's still form before Deidara leaped up onto the wall of the gorge and began running up it in his attempt to escape, Gaara's body still under his arm. Naruto tensed as 2 black and white, ink-made tigers leaped at the man but merely impacted into the wall with a loud crash as Deidara dodged to the left. Deidara disappeared into the thick forest at the top of the gorge and Naruto grimaced as he turned to the 2 lookouts. "I'm going after him. The other teams have Akasuna no Sasori inside the cave," he informed them before leaping onto the wall of the gorge and beginning his own path up the side of the gorge. The sound of footsteps behind him drew Naruto's attention, and Naruto was slightly surprised to see Niji behind him. "You may be incredibly fast, Naruto, but I'm not going to let you fight him alone," he said quietly. "Besides, I'm a jounin now. I outrank you, so you can't order me away," he said with a small smirk, and Naruto resigned himself to his partner. Naruto nodded and increased his speed as he hit the tree branches of the forest at the top of the gorge. Noting that Niji did so as well, and keeping pace with him as they tracked their opponent through the forest. Scene break. It was a few minutes later that Naruto felt the first obstacle he and Neji would face. 20 small dots of chakra seemed to fall back from their prey towards Naruto and his partner. "Neji," Naruto warned. "I see them," Neji replied, the veins around his eyes bulging from the activation of his bloodline trait. Naruto ran through a few hand seals just as the first of the explosive clay birds appeared before them and then took a deep breath. "Futon," Kamaitachi Naruto said as his mouth opened, filling the forest with blades of deadly wind scythes. It took a moment from the time that Naruto let out his attack to the moment it met with his opponents, and then there was a rocking explosion as close to 20 explosions rocked the forest in front of Naruto and Neji. Naruto and Neji landed on a branch before leaping through the ruined forest. Neji reached into his pouch and withdrew 2 shuriken, flicking them in opposite directions. 2 more explosions occurred as his attacks connected with the birds Naruto's attack had missed. For the next part of their chase, Naruto and Neji had to deal with occasional traps to stall them from drawing close enough to Deidara to stop him. Naruto and Neji suddenly came across a wide clearing within the forest. Deidara was already on the opposite side of the clearing. Gaara's body dropped haphazardly next to him as he looked excitedly at his opponents. Both shinobi dropped into the clearing, wary of their surroundings, and faced their opponent. Tense silence filled the air as they looked at each other before Deidara smirked as Naruto and Neji suddenly dodged the explosion he had set beneath them. Naruto looked back to see the explosive clay shine brightly before exploding and wondered why he hadn't felt the chakra it would have been infused with. Naruto quickly took advantage of the explosion as he ran through a few hand seals. "Haha! Art is a blast!" Deidara laughed as he watched Neji and Naruto separate to avoid being blown apart. He placed a small amount of chakra inside the clay, then rapidly increased the concentration to cause it to explode. Neji said calmly, informing Naruto of how the clay had exploded. Deidara's eyes snapped over to Neji, narrowing slightly before he locked eyes with Naruto. Naruto disappeared into a puff of smoke and Deidara's eyes widened as Naruto approached him from behind with a Rasengan in hand. "Rasengan!" Naruto shouted as he plunged the deadly ball of chakra into the man's back. Neji barely saw the man's smirk before the body Naruto was trying to kill turned a milky white and began to glow. Naruto's eyes widened as he immediately leaped away from the bomb. "Katsu!" Deidara said from his hiding place at the other edge of the clearing. Smoke enveloped Naruto for a moment before he broke free of it. He hadn't been fast enough to escape the blast. His entire right side was burned badly. His arm was the worst, resembling an overcooked piece of meat from on top of the grill in their hibachi restaurants. The whole right side of his body smoked from the fire that had caught on his clothes. Naruto landed and winced when he put weight on his right leg. His eyes contracted from the pain he felt from the blast he had so carelessly been caught in. "What do you think of my art now?" Deidara said happily as he smiled at the 2 Konoha ninja. "You've let your guard down," Neji replied, and Deidara's eyes widened when 4 Narutos appeared from the brush. One grasped his arm, slammed him to the ground. 2 others sat on his legs and the final one smashed his foot on top of his hand, stopping him from forming the deadly hand seal he needed to accomplish his explosions. "You lost the moment you assumed Naruto would attack you without a backup plan," Neji said calmly as he approached the downed Akatsuki member. "Now, I think you have some information we could use," Neji said menacingly as his fingertips began to glow with his chakra. Deidara, however, only laughed before he said, "Art is a bang," and his entire body suddenly swelled up as if he were some obscene balloon. Neji's eyes widened and Naruto tensed from across the clearing. Knowing his injury would prevent him from getting away from the amount of chakra he could feel being gathered. Deidara smiled even as he felt his body distort and the explosion start. The fleeting moment of his brilliance shone from inside his body, and he reveled in the power he felt building and expanding inside him. This was what art was all about, the single expressive moment in time that the artist's brilliance was proven and he was acknowledged by the death of his opponent. All of a sudden, Deidara's left eye contracted behind his scope and the man's rage grew as he broke the genjutsu he felt. He found himself now standing at the opposite side of the clearing from Naruto, Neji, and a clone of Naruto which was bringing Gaara's body to their side. "Genjutsu is not art," Deidara swore as if Naruto or Neji had presented the idea. "I see." Naruto said as he cradled a burnt right arm. Deidara's rage decreased slightly as he beheld the fact he had managed to hurt Naruto in some way, but he couldn't pinpoint when he had been placed in the Genjutsu and when he wasn't. The mere fact was irritating to no end. You use your chakra as a catalyst to explode your clay sculptures. It's a very unique style of fighting, Naruto commented, but utterly useless against me. Deidara's eyes contracted. Don't underestimate me or my art. My ninjutsu is the very pinnacle of artistic accomplishment, he yelled at Naruto. Ever since I faced Itachi, I've trained my left eye to counter Genjutsu. There's no way you can beat me. Naruto looked at Deidara and shook his head. Yes, I can, and I've already done it, he said as he pointed his burnt right pointer finger at Deidara. Deidara smiled maniacally as he held his hand out, the clay bird he had made. Take this, he said as he threw the clay bird forward, and it flew rapidly towards Naruto and Neji. Naruto sighed and lazily flicked a shuriken directly at the bird when it reached within 5 feet of his team. Deidara formed his hand seal. Art is a blast, he yelled out as he channeled his chakra. Naruto and Neji looked bored as they watched the clay bird fall to the ground, cut in half from Naruto's attack, and Deidara's eyes widened as he felt his chakra siphon into the clay, but it didn't explode. Deidara seemed to shiver before he formed his hand seal once again and tried to explode the bird once again, only to receive a failure. He stared at the bird in disbelief before he reached into his pouch and began to formulate another bird, throwing it into the air. He watched it fly forward and then he tried to detonate it as well, only to receive failure as Naruto's shuriken flashed out once again. Deidara looked lost at his 2 birds before he screamed at Naruto, "What did you do to my art?" His blue eyes seemed to hold a glint of insanity as he looked at the Genjutsu master before him. Naruto remained utterly silent as Deidara started to mutter to himself, I know. This is another Genjutsu," he said madly as he formed a hand seal and yelled, "Katsu!" He formed yet another bird only to fail once again. Neji looked at Naruto with slight fear in his eyes as he watched the man in front of them slowly go insane from the fact Naruto had sealed his precious art with a single point of his finger. Neji could see what Naruto had done. The way Naruto had confused Deidara's own chakra with an infusion of his own, utilizing it to form a sort of blockage that Deidara couldn't undo. The fact was, the Genjutsu was being sustained by Deidara's own chakra whenever he built it up to cause an explosion. That was why he couldn't stop the Genjutsu. It only took effect when he was trying to blow something up. Shouldn't we capture or kill him, Naruto? Neji asked quietly, though Deidara only seemed to be descending further and further into madness. Naruto shook his head. His eyes flickered to Gaara's still body and Neji suddenly understood why he did this. That man deserves to go insane before I send him to hell with the rest of his organization. Neji and Naruto paid witness to the man's slow descent for an indeterminate amount of time before they saw the rest of their teams move to join with them. It took them a few minutes to move towards them, but soon enough the entire 2.5 teams had gathered in their clearing, looking at a man slowly going insane. None of them seemed hurt beyond Chio, whom was breathing a bit harsher than the rest of them. It was Tenten who spoke first as they looked at Deidara in fear. "My God, what did you 2 do to him?" she asked. Her tone made it clear she was terrified of the fact that such a strong shinobi could be so easily destroyed mentally. Unfortunately, this new voice also brought Deidara's eyes up to lock with Naruto's ice-cold blues, and the man rushed forward with an inarticulate cry of rage. "You did this!" he screamed as drool dribbled down his face. Naruto's face turned from cold to snarling as he flickered forward. Grasping the man from behind, his hands around the man's head, he spoke quietly. "Tell your organization welcome from Uzumaki Naruto. I'll be sending them to meet you in hell shortly." Before, with a sharp jerk of his arms, the man's spine was cracked and his body slid to the floor, limp as a noodle. It was only now did Neji notice that Naruto's arm only looked like he had been singed when it looked badly burnt not long ago. Naruto stood and moved over to his clone, ignoring the looks he was getting from some of the younger Konoha shinobi. Wordlessly, the clone handed Gaara's body to Naruto before dispelling into a puff of smoke. Naruto never saw the contemplative look in Chio's eyes as he turned, facing where Tsunade was. "Let's return the Kazekage to his proper resting place," he said. Only Samui, Kakashi, and Chio caught the slight crack in his voice as he spoke of Gaara's death before he was suddenly off. Scene break. Naruto leaped through the trees effortlessly as he fought, tears in his eyes. He felt a kinship to Gaara that he hadn't known until he saw the still body of his former fellow Jinchuriki. Naruto hadn't ever felt this before. Not with his team. Not with his friends. The bond of pain and hardship was one not easily bore, and Naruto barely recognized that he understood Gaara probably better than almost anyone else in Konoha and Suna. As a result, the death of Gaara, even though he didn't know him personally, was certainly an event which would affect him in the days to come. However, it was surprising to Naruto that he felt so strongly for the almost stranger, almost brother in his arms. Blinking away tears, Naruto's sadness at the brutal death of his fellow Jinchuriki was palpable, but he also felt the rage bubbling up from inside him. That the man who had defeated Gaara and brought him to his death would so callously sit upon the body of his defeated foe was certainly something Naruto would never forget. He had avenged Gaara's murder, but the sadness remained. The loneliness a Jinchuriki suffered through returned to the surface of Naruto's thoughts. The days and nights, the weeks, the months, the years he had spent almost completely isolated from his village, never having any true connections to the place he called home. He had some connections, but he also knew, now, that those connections were forged in the interest of keeping him there, and the loneliness he felt from looking back at that time was almost unbearable. Looking down at Gaara's still body, his anger grew and he felt Kyuubi stir. They will know the power of the Kyuubi and the wrath of Uzumaki Naruto. The beast's deep voice said. Its voice was a deep rumbling thing within the confines of his mind, and Naruto was a bit surprised at its wording, but he couldn't help the vicious smirk that spread across his face as he thought of what he and Kyuubi would do when he and Jiraiya finally tracked down the other members of Akatsuki. Naruto stopped his running abruptly, dropping down at the edge of the forest, and looked up, out over the expanse of desert he saw in front of him, squinting his eyes to see if what he felt was the truth. Idly, Naruto noticed that his fellow ninja dropped down from the trees behind him. A few of them were breathing heavy from the pace or injuries they had, but as a whole, they were fine. "Why did you stop, Uzumaki?" Chiyo asked. Naruto shot a glare over his shoulder. His kinship with Gaara had certainly destroyed most of the respect he felt for the elder puppet master, seeing as how she had been the one to seal the beast inside Gaara. Naruto didn't say anything other than jerking his head back towards the desert, which all of the ninja looked at only to blink in surprise when they saw what Naruto had felt. There, upon every dune of sand the desert possessed, stretched a horde of Suna shinobi, rushing to their Kage's aid, hoping against hope that they would be capable of saving the man who had terrorized them for the majority of his life, but also protected them at the cost of his own. Naruto looked down at Gaara. A small ray of happiness spread through him as he thought about the pride Gaara must have felt at being the protection for all of his people, for fulfilling his role as the Kazekage, for living as protection for others and not only for himself. It took only a few minutes for the rushing Suna shinobi to cross the desert to where the contingent of shinobi stood. Sad looks came Naruto's way as he held the limp body of their Kazekage in his arms. Some of the younger shinobi burst into tears at the sight of Gaara's body. The older immediately had grim looks upon their faces, either promising retribution or intense sadness, as they looked upon one of their greatest protectors. Kankuro and Temari looked devastated as they watched Naruto step forward, his blue eyes, for once, showing empathy and understanding as opposed to the ice-cold gaze he had favored them with 3 years ago. Naruto's face was grim as he stopped in front of Temari, her hands in front of her face as her disbelieving eyes locked on Gaara's body. Slowly, Naruto bowed down, then got on his knees as he smoothed out Gaara's body, making him look more asleep than a limp doll in his arms. "I'm sorry." His whispered apology only caused Temari's resolve to crumble as she turned from Gaara's body, crashing into her elder brother's arms as she began to sob from the loss of her little brother. Naruto slowly straightened, looking down at Gaara with sadness in his eyes before he turned on his heel, stepping purposefully away from his almost brother's corpse and made his way towards Samui. He felt his heart clench at the cries of Temari, but he continued to walk away, reaching his partner within a few strides. Samui looked him in the eyes for a brief second before she raised her hand, offering his orange sash before her. Naruto grasped the sash, wrapping it around his waist and tying it once again before he and Samui turned to re-enter the forest. It was just as Naruto was preparing to increase his speed that Chiyo's voice rang out once again amongst the sadness pervading the area. "Where are you going, Uzumaki?" she asked with a purpose, her eyes shining. Naruto didn't even turn around. I have Akatsuki members to hunt, he said, and though he said it quietly, he knew that some of the Suna shinobi heard his declaration as he felt their chakra flare in response. Naruto was about to leap into the forest when Chiyo retorted, "Calm yourself, Uzumaki Naruto." Naruto stiffened, turning his head so he could survey the elder who had so callously told him not to avenge the death of her Kazekage. All of a sudden, the shinobi surrounding the area took in a sharp breath as his heavy chakra saturated the air. Sadness and rage swirled around them as Naruto stared into Chiyo's eyes. It wasn't Naruto whom spoke then, as Chiyo turned from his intense gaze. "I have made many mistakes in my life," she said quietly, walking towards Gaara's body. Naruto noted that Kankuro's eyes widened as he watched the elder run through hand seals before kneeling next to Gaara's body and placing her hands upon his chest. A blue glow surrounded her hands as the chakra she used hummed into life, cutting through his heavy chakra easily. Naruto's own eyes widened as his sensor told him just exactly what that jutsu was doing to Chiyo's own body. "Still, it seems in my final moments, I might be able to make up for that." She spoke quietly and Naruto's eyes narrowed as he walked back to her. The entire Suna nation was surprised when 9 tails of glowing blue chakra appeared from Naruto's tailbone, and they all watched as they suddenly pierced Chiyo, whose eyes widened when the tips of the tails entered her. Many of the older Suna shinobi moved to attack Naruto until they noticed that Chiyo's hands suddenly glowed with an intensity that almost hurt to look at. Chiyo cackled lightly as she felt Naruto's own chakra circulating through her as a conduit. "You are an odd one, Uzumaki Naruto. I am glad that one such as you has appeared though, in this world made by foolish old shinobi." She whispered to him and missed the look that spread across his face. It was quiet for a few more minutes before Chiyo coughed once. "Could you do this old woman one last favor?" Naruto shook his head. "If Gaara is to be brought back, it should be by those who truly wish for him to be back. Ask them," he said. Chiyo looked up but her voice failed her. Naruto, feeling her waning strength, scoffed lightly. "If you want Gaara to return, you need to show him that you want him to," he said loudly, looking directly at the teary eyes of his siblings. "All of you, find Gaara and bring him back to your village," he said as his eyes swept across the surrounding Suna shinobi. Slowly, one by one, eyes of the Suna shinobi closed as they all began to whisper under their breath, apparently carrying their own conversations with the deceased Gaara. Behind Naruto, the Konoha shinobi as well as his partner, watched as Chiyo's hands slowly grew dimmer and dimmer before disappearing altogether, although Chiyo only seemed to slump slightly as Naruto's tails stayed within her back. It didn't take long before Gaara's hands twitched, and then his eyes opened, blinking in the blue sky. His head lolled to the side and his eyes widened as he took in the smiling visages of the shinobi whom had called him back from the white abyss. Slowly, he sat up and looked around in surprise as his surrounding shinobi's sadness disappeared. Kankuro's eyes widened when he saw Chiyo stand. Though she looked on the brink of death, she was still alive. Gaara looked at her in surprise and Chiyo frowned. "What do you think you're doing, Uzumaki Naruto?" she asked. Naruto smiled lightly. "You deserve to see your home, one final time," he said quietly, and Chiyo remained silent before cackling wildly as she and Naruto began to walk across the desert plain. Gaara struggled to his feet, being supported by his siblings quickly, but plodded along behind them, his eyes locked on the elder who had destined him to loneliness but brought him back as the entire contingent of shinobi headed back to Suna. The Suna shinobi parted like a wave as Naruto, Chiyo, and Gaara walked past them, falling into place behind them as they made the short travel to the dune which would allow them a view of their beloved Tsunade. Naruto and Chiyo crested the dune, looking upon the village of her birth with a small smile on her face. Gaara walked up next to her, mindful of the tails of chakra Naruto had implanted in the woman's body. He placed a hand on her shoulder. A single look between the two and Naruto knew the woman was ready. Slowly, his tails disappeared and Chiyo's smiling face slid into slackness as the woman slumped into the sand like a puppet with its strings having been cut. An almost poetic end to such a legendary puppet master.